I'm Dennis Anderson along with Michael Lagarde, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
Lawmakers in St. Paul are working under a revised budget projection and some differences of opinion on spending projects. Senator Tom Bakk of Cook joins us with an update.
Well, a study released this week by the Pew Center shows people are going digital for their news, but they want strong local content.
And the first Native American astronaut was in Superior this week, and we'll hear from him.
We've got these stories and the business news coming up right now on Almanac North. Hello and welcome again to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. Michael Lagarde is filling in for Julie this week. And Mike, we welcome you to the set.
You know, I'm always happy to help out, and I'm happy to be here tonight with you, Denny.
All right, very good, Mike. A lot to talk about, so we might as well get started.
Thanks, Denny. Our first guest has been serving in the Minnesota legislature since 1994, and since 2002 has been the senator from District 3 in northern Minnesota. He's a former candidate for governor and the current Senate Minority Leader. Joining us now is Senator Tom Bakk, DFLer from Cook. And welcome, Senator. Thanks for being here. Senator, one of the big items this year is a proposed gas tax. And could you please tell us about that?
Well, we haven't raised the gas tax since 2008, and our transportation infrastructure continues to deteriorate. There are a lot of people who want to use general fund money for transportation, but that's not a very reliable source because depending on the economic situation, the general fund ebbs and flows with the economy. Really, the best source is the Highway Trust Fund. It's constitutionally dedicated to roads and bridges. That's where your license tab money goes. That's where your sales tax when you buy an automobile goes. That's where the gas tax goes. So it really is the most reliable source of funding. 2 years ago, when we were running a surplus, the Republicans who controlled the legislature at the time decided to use some general fund money for transportation. And so they took a look at the sales tax that's attributable to auto parts, tires, windshields, those kind of things. And they took about half of it, about $230 million a year, and moved it over to the transportation budget. And I objected to that. I actually ended up voting for it in the end because we needed money for transportation so bad. But now that the economy has slowed down, our GDP growth has slowed down, we really need to claw back that general fund money to the general fund so we can put some money into schools and higher ed and the other things that we use the general fund for. But we can't shortchange transportation because we still have a need there. Mm-hmm. So it would take about 7 cents a gallon in order to just hold transportation funding static where it's at today. If we could do 7 cents, we could get the sales tax back into the general fund for schools. You can see in the Senate's budget targets that came out yesterday, they only put 1% on the K-12 formula in the first year and 0 in the second year. That's a serious problem. Inflation in schools is higher than that. They're mostly salaries, about 80–85% salaries. And if the legislature doesn't put general fund spending into K-12, you just see more and more voter referendums out there, so it puts more and more pressure on property taxes. So we really need a gas tax increase.
Senator, some people are saying if there's an increase in the gas tax, it's really an increase in taxes on people who can least afford it. How do you respond to that?
Well, the gas tax is a regressive tax, but it's really the best way to fund our transportation system because it's a user fee. Only people that use the transportation system pay it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's regressive, but, you know, so is the sales tax, is more regressive than the income tax is. So cigarette taxes, of all things, are the most regressive taxes we have in our whole
Do you see this getting by the Republicans?
I think something will happen on the gas tax at the end of the day. When they were putting their targets together, they could see there just wasn't enough general fund money. That's why they shortchanged K-12 education so bad. So they're going to need some money too in order to compromise with the governor. And the gas tax seems like the logical place to go, user fee, and then get the general fund back for general fund purposes.
So what about single payer health insurance then? Where does the party stand on that?
Well, we're in the Senate at least, Democrats aren't in control, so we're not driving the agenda. There will be, come out of this session, just like the last 2 years, some kind of a premium subsidy for people that are in the individual market they don't get their health insurance through their employer. There will be some kind of premium relief for those individuals that have to private pay for their health insurance. But there really is, Minnesota really didn't benefit that much by the Affordable Care Act, commonly referred to as Obamacare. We had Minnesota Care, we had something called MSHA for people who couldn't get insurance. Minnesota, before the Affordable Care Act passed, had about 94% of our citizens insured. We were at one of the highest insured rates in the country. Many states had 70, 80% of their people insured, so they really benefited a lot from the Affordable Care Act. Minnesota really was ahead of other states, so didn't get the benefit many others did.
The Line 3 pipeline, good idea, bad idea?
Good idea. You know, I just gave a speech on the Senate floor yesterday on that subject because there are people that think somehow if we don't build the pipeline, we're going to shut off the supply of oil. That's not going to happen.
Right.
The refineries need the crude oil. It's going to come from Canada, and the safest way to move oil is in a pipe. And if we don't build a pipeline, it's going to come in by rail. And in my district specifically, the busiest port of entry for rail across the entire Canadian border is Rainier, Minnesota, right outside International Falls. Mm-hmm. There are 28 to 35 trains a day that come through Rainier, then down through Orr and Cook and through Virginia. And they're about 10,000 feet long. And we expect about 15% increase in traffic over this next year. I really am not interested in all those trains being full of oil cars because some kind of accident's going to happen, and it's probably going to happen in one of those small towns where you have, you know, at-grade crossings. That's the piece of track that always gets the most stress because of all the vehicles going over it.
Expanded mining not far from where you live.
Well, we're making every taconite pellet we can right now. The world market for taconite's really solid. The next generation of mining, not that taconite's going to go away, but we've got about 200 years of known reserves for taconite, for iron ore mining. The next generation is non-ferrous mining.
Right.
Polymet is the first project on the old LTV site at Hoyt Lakes.
Should they go ahead?
It's going to go ahead. It's got all the permits now. It's just they're
more legalities.
Trying to get the
face?
No. Well, there's a number of lawsuits, but that always happens. We got lawsuits even on the Nashwauk, commonly called the Esser project. There were lawsuits on those permits also. It's just a matter of the financing. I expect that'll be under construction by fall.
Okay.
So Minnesota being a medical marijuana state, this was the first time in at least my memory that recreational marijuana was actually thought about. What is your stance on that?
Well, I personally don't support it. I think we need to take some time and see how the states that have legalized it, what their experience is. Colorado was the first, and then California, Alaska, I believe Oregon and Washington probably. I think we're probably going to take a go slow approach here in Minnesota and see what their experience was with it. I'm still a little bit concerned with the fact that it's illegal federally. So, I mean, they can't use any kind of business that is federally regulated. So they can't bank, so it's an entire cash business. They can't get insurance because insurance companies are regulated also. So I'd like to see the federal government legalize it first. But I think it's probably going to happen here, but it's not going to happen this session.
Twice in the past we've had passenger train service between the Twin Ports and the Twin Cities. Should we try it again?
I think so. It will be dependent on getting federal money. The state doesn't have the resources to build
You think,
that.
are there enough passengers to ride it, though?
Well, it didn't work the first time.
Or the second time?
So we'll see. But you know, we're building a lot of passenger rail around the Twin Cities right now to alleviate some of the congestion. It certainly works in metropolitan areas with higher density to get people off the roads. And you know, downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul, parking's about $150 a month. So if your employer doesn't pay for that, that's a pretty steep monthly
But you
bill.
wouldn't mind throwing in some state and local funds for passenger rail?
I think the state will participate on that. I don't know if it'll happen during my tenure. I'm closer to my retirement than I am to when I started. So we've been talking about it for a long time already. But we'll need some federal money to make it happen.
So what about a special session? Do you think there's a possibility of that happening?
Well, I don't know. We're going to adjourn on May 20th. That's constitutionally is the date we have to be done. What I don't know is, and I think no one knows, and maybe the governor doesn't even know, if the Senate Republicans won't come his direction on some of his spending priorities, and the governor decides to really dig in, you know, we could end up in a special session. It's just going to depend on the willingness of the governor and the Senate Republicans to find some middle ground.
Mm-hmm. This isn't a bonding year, but this could become a year to bond?
Well, we're pretty fortunate here in the Northland that Representative Mary Murphy is the new bonding chair in the House, so should help our chances of getting some projects in our area of the state. It's normally bonding is done not in the budget years, but I have seen in budget years where part of a kind of a global package to wrap the session up, a bonding bill all of a sudden will emerge. I think it's possible that could happen this year. Probably, you know, probably something north of 500 million if one does happen.
Senator Bakk, we've run out of time, and I just want to thank you for coming in tonight and talking about some of the issues for Minnesota.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Start in little small steps. The launch is incredible. The first time you take your seatbelt off and your harness, you start floating out of your chair. That gets your attention. So every kid's dream, you know, to be your own little spaceship and tumble around. What I remember most about flying in space, it was not being there and looking back at the Earth, but was the work I did. It was the work I did with some remarkable people. The primary job on our mission was to take 3 people to space and bring 3 people home. Our secondary mission was to install a large truss on the outside of space station. So myself and another astronaut, Mike Lopez Alegria, did 3 spacewalks and helped, once it was installed, we helped remove all the launch locks. We had ammonia lines we had to connect. We had to put covers over batteries, just a lot of mechanical work. But you're moving really fast, you know, 17,500 miles an hour. So it takes 90 minutes to go around the Earth. And you just look down and you see places you grew up, you see places where you hiked as a kid or went backpacking, and it takes you there, but you can't see it. You see the macro of it, but not the micro. You don't see the people. It makes you feel really small. It's an opportunity for me to share my story with other kids that are native that never had, you know, somebody in that role, and so I have a neat opportunity, and I really take it to heart. It's something I find that it's really important that I share that story with others.
Earlier this week, a public forum was held in Superior to discuss local news coverage trends. Well, citizens in Superior and Douglas County say they want more local news as they crave more connection to the community. A Pew Research Center report out this week showed similar results, even as more people seek out digital sources for their news. The media landscape is certainly changing in the 21st century. Joining us tonight to talk about news reporting is Heidi Holtan, News and Public Affairs Director with KAXE Northern Community Radio in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And Danielle Kaeding is a reporter with the Superior Bureau of Wisconsin Public Radio. Thank you very much for both of you being here tonight. I'm wondering if, first of all, tell us, what is a news desert? That's rather an interesting term.
What is a news desert? There aren't as many reporters. It's hard to report on the news. We cover a large rural area, so to report on the news of all these communities we cover, and people have more access to national news, and so sometimes you end up being more interested in national news than what's going on down the street. That in turn makes funding for local news tougher. So,
and sometimes issues like whether or not areas have access to high-speed internet might play a role in whether or not people can access the kind of local content they want. You know, might end up that they would rely more on local news rather than national or state news.
You're both working in radio. Are you finding a radio audience is dwindling?
I wouldn't say so. I think we struggle with finding the next generation of radio listeners. I think we have a strong following. People appreciate even hearing what events are going on locally or in rural areas. Younger listeners come to us in different ways. So we podcast, we're online as well. People are really busy. Nowadays you're not competing for other radio stations. We're competing with Netflix. We're competing with podcasts. And so it's just a different landscape now.
So I'm just wondering, you both probably, I would imagine, check out all the news when you get up in the morning. How do you receive your news?
Well, I'm checking all of the different news outlets just to see what they're reporting on, and then also looking at different community organizations and calendars and civic organizations or city council agendas and meeting minutes or county board. You know, you're looking all over the place and trying to prioritize what are the pressing needs of the day. You know, if there are events happening or if there's a public safety issue that needs to be reported on, and trying to go about it that way.
I was really disappointed when the Superior Oil Refinery blew up. I couldn't find a station locally on radio that was reporting that explosion. I was sitting in my car watching it from Skyline Drive, and I couldn't get one bit of detail on the radio for the longest time. Then it repeated when the grain elevator caught fire here late last year. And again, for hours, I just couldn't get anything on the radio. That's part of that desert, isn't it? Where are radio stations not covering news anymore?
I think radio stations are covering the news in different ways. You know, what you've cited right there is a complaint that we've received about our coverage of the Husky Oil Refinery fire. While we were providing updates, it wasn't constant wall-to-wall coverage, and I think that's something that people want in an emergency situation. But when you have a staff of one, where I'm the only reporter, then I'm out in the field trying to bring in that information, and without the resources or support back at the station to be able to go live, what do you do in that type of circumstance?
Yeah, I think she makes a really good point. People are used to this kind of wall-to-wall coverage when things happen. What we can provide on radio or in a small media organization is kind of giving people more time. It may not be right when something's happening, but we can kind of have more prolonged conversations with people, maybe after the fact. But I think it is somewhat a disservice to our audience because we can't be there because we are so small staffed.
Right, and we want to be there.
Right.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So at the forum that was held the other night, what exactly did you discuss there, and what was, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, we discussed a lot of different things, like the definition of a news desert and what it is that people want to see in the Superior community, what the survey revealed, changes that are occurring in the news industry, whether that's local or national, and how social media is playing a role in all of that. You know, 15 years ago, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, and that's been a real way for people to get their news now. They're sharing information online and not really going to the media for that. So that's been a challenge, I think, for all different levels of news.
How does age play a role in local news habits?
Yeah, well, I think the younger population is used to going to social media as that first step, or going to Twitter to find out the breaking news or the most recent information. I think older consumers are more comfortable with having that paper in their hands or listening to a trusted voice on the radio or television, Denny. It just changes depending by individuals.
At my age, I still turn on the radio to try to
Right.
find breaking news, and certainly television and the newspaper. I'm of that generation that I'm kind of locked into that more than I am digital.
We find a lot of people, even in their, in their 30s, they don't have radios in their house anymore.
They don't? What?
No. Sorry to say, we don't like that, but you can listen to us on your smartphone.
Sure.
It's about us figuring out how do we get to those people, and some of that is providing, we do a lot of events or concerts or things, and so giving events and then letting them know what we provide, and then giving them our website and how they can get to us. But it is a hurdle, because radios were kind of built into everything at one point, and they're not as much anymore.
Yeah.
So is there a role that maybe citizens can play in this? Maybe citizen journalism? Would you think? I don't.
I've heard that mentioned, and that was brought up at the forum, and I would welcome anyone's opportunity or desire to want to learn how to do journalism, but usually that's not very sustainable. You'll get somebody who's interested on one particular topic or one particular meeting, but it becomes much more difficult, especially for volunteers, to sustain that, and they don't have the training and the discernment to understand what they should be doing when they're reporting the news, how to be complete and fair and accurate and ethical in their reporting.
See, and that's, I guess, my follow-up question. How would you have a checks and balances on maybe that type of situation?
Well, and that would involve more resources, which we don't really have right now. So that makes it even more difficult.
I hear you saying there are financial challenges facing radio news.
I don't know that I would say it's financial, because we are seeing growth right now. I mean, the Pew Research Center released a State of the Media report, and they're seeing growth in the number of donations that are being given by people to public radio. I think it's a change or a shift in the way they're trying to reach their audience, because they see people going online or they see them going to podcasts, that they're trying to figure out, where do we reach people? How do we reach people? The TV newscasts at 10 o'clock, they're losing their audience to Netflix or streaming services. So how do we reach people in a different way, and how do we still provide what it is they need to know?
So with how do you make a radio desert flourish? I know you said resources, but there has to be other ways that you're thinking of this could be.
I think some of it might be that it's up to us to kind of point out some of these things, that some news sources, what real journalism is, that people are, there's a number of sources in a story, talking to people that you trust, having relationships with other news organizations that you trust, and kind of pointing out some journalism that you see out there, what sources out there that might not be trustworthy. That's something that we can do in radio, I think.
And I would agree. I mean, especially on the collaboration piece, that's been kind of essential, as resources have been pulled back in some instances to find new partnerships with different types of media, whether it's newspapers or television or online sources, to try and pool those resources so that we can cover as much as possible.
Sure, okay. Heidi, Danielle, we have to run. Thank you both very much. Great
you.
conversation.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to the business news from the editors at Business North. The first vessel of the 2019 maritime season passed through the Soo Locks this week, marking the official opening of the Interlake shipping season on Lake Superior. Interlake Steamship Company's 1,000-footer, the Stuart J. Court, was first through the locks. The captain and crew were greeted with first ship caps by Soo officials. Last year, American Century was the first ship through the Soo Locks.
For a third time, the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission has voted unanimously in support of constructing Enbridge Line No. 3 pipeline across northern Minnesota. Commissioners voted in support of providing a certificate of need for the project, which will replace a 50-year-old line with a new one. Earlier, many opponents contended the line isn't needed and harms the environment, saying it contributes to climate change. The latest appeal was filed by the State Department of Commerce with the support of Governor Tim Walz, who said the decision should receive further review.
Emily Larson will again be running for Duluth mayor this fall. Larson announced her re-election campaign on Wednesday with her husband and sons at her side. She said in the future her priorities will be roads and sewer systems, climate change, affordable housing, jobs, and economic development. Larson said in the past 4 years she has worked to make city government more inclusive, fair, and transparent. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
And so if you have a comment on our show, call now, dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message or send an email to almanacnorth@wdsc.org and visit the WDSC website for the latest program schedule, news, and information about the station and upcoming special events. And Mike, thanks again so much for being here tonight. It was great to work with you.
And it's always great to work with you, Dennis, and congratulations on your inclusion into the Minnesota Broadcasting Hall of Fame.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you. It's exciting for me, that's for sure. All right, Mike, for Michael Lagarde and the whole team here at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Thanks for watching. Have a good night, everybody, and be kind.